Welcome back to the 7th installment of our workflow application tutorial. All right, let's go ahead and look at what this is. We're going to get out of this lesson. As you can see, this is the module where we add steps and then we add tasks. It's our task module workflow. And now, as you can see, that data for each step is showing up in a new timeline module we'll be building. So we'll be having a start date and a due date, and then a bunch of other dates based on our workflow. Okay, so let's clean up a little bit. These reset functions, I do need to pass a little bit of details to it. So based on what function I've been using, I need to pass that. Didn't do that earlier, so I need to show you all that I did that. And from here, you can see that our ticket builder is seems to be working. I'm kind of running through and checking where we're at here. And I also want to color our active buttons because they really don't do it for me with this Bootstrap framework. Comes with the theme that we're using from Bootswatch, and I can't see what's active. So what I'm going to do is make it yellow if it's an active button. And I have to fight a little bit with the Bootstrap CSS here. So as you can see, there's still white. So I'm going to go in there and kind of do a very rare thing in what you're supposed to do in CSS is write the important. And as you can see, it's still not doing it, still fighting it. And so I will be resorting to writing important and to override the Bootstrap. The Bootstrap's got CSS already applied here, so I had to override it. But now I can really see what I'm doing. So let's go ahead and bring in some dynamic dates. And as y'all remember, we had a generic update for our date selector. One of the biggest problems I've found with a lot of people is they'll put in like the 31st when there's only 28 days or 30 days in a month, and it'll really screw up databases. So what I'm going to be doing here is finding out what year and month they've selected, and then I will drill down and find out how many days are in that specific month. And then from there, I will dictate how many days are shown within the day selection menu. Pretty simple functionality here, but man, oh man, can you save some time. Chasing down like dates that don't exist in a timeline is going to be very difficult. You will have a blank. If it doesn't break it, it's going to screw something up. So this is pretty important to avoid human error, and it's fairly simple. What I'm doing is I'm just getting the dates that I figured out, putting into the new date, the year and the month, and then the new date function that comes with the get date function that comes with JavaScript. Is actually, if you just hit (0) at the end, you're going to punch out the actual amount of days so that are in that month. So it's a fairly simple thing when you hit new date and then get date. This is the arguments you want to put in to find out the max days of that specific month. Very helpful. And then from here, I'm going to go down to the menu and say, hey, as you're writing this menu and returning all these options, can you stop doing it when we get to the max days per month? Because I don't want somebody messing up. And so I'll just hit a return false if it gets past that. Anyway, so back to our generic update here. Just kind of verifying that everything was working. My console log is a lot of times you'll see me just to verify I'm getting what I need. Really, really simple stuff. A lot of ways to do console logging. This is just mine. And you'll see the result of what my work is doing here. And I put the console log, and once we start messing with the menus, you can see the result. You got to do what year, and we got to know what month first. If it doesn't do the year and a month first, it doesn't take effect to the dates. It just goes to 31. So one other thing, when we go to different modules, we need to be able to pass what active ticket is live. That way they don't have to select the ticket over and over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the ticket, once it gets selected, I'm going to put it in session storage, so that the module remembers by checking session storage where they were the last time, and it will automatically fire off the populate fields and we're going to go ahead and get tickets and get messages and everything we need to do to set up the module for success. So like, let's say I selected one ticket. If I go to the timeline and then I move around to the workflow, I just want to have the same ticket open all the time. So here it is telling me to get tickets, as long, if it's null, we need to grab the tickets. And if it's not null, great. Let's go ahead and find out if there's a session storage for the active ticket. And if so, let's make that the selected item we're going to retreat. And so as you do, as you hear, I'm going to do selected for the active ticket and then populate fields. And this is going to be something I'm going to use on every page. So the workflow is going to get it. We're going to put it on the timeline. Basically, it's just the same thing everywhere you go. It's like when it starts up, it's like, what do we have that was already open? And that's what it does. Okay, let's see what else we got. Now, I just need to finish up this error catch that the get was not on the client side. I did not have this. I needed to slide this in here. I just saw that it was needed. And get messages needs to be something called immediately, so I just moved that. So we're checking the workflow, and as you notice, there's these huge gaps, and it just doesn't look right. So I'm going to do some CSS cleanup and just get rid of some of these gaps. I'm using the utilities, as you can see, like the PT-2. That's padding top 2. They're going by the REM sizes. So I can change that or just take it out. That's a margin on the y-axis -2 for the other one. So these are utilities you can find in Bootstrap that'll help your padding. And they're really helpful so you don't have to create your own. And if you know them, you can fix your padding mistakes fast. And I suggest go look at those utilities. Okay, so here in the workflow, what are we going to do next here? So let's bring in the date selection module. We need to import it into our workflow. So that each step is going to have a start and end date, basically. So you have a list of tasks, and not only do we ask how much money is going to be involved in this step, we're also going to ask when's the step end and start. And this data that we're building needs to be passed through. How do you identify if you have this date selector module multiple times? It'll be confusing, and you need to have a unique name. As you can see, I'm passing a variable called menu. And the value of that variable will help us identify each date selector independently. And so I'm going to do some CSS to clean this around. What I've come to determine is, in this case, using the 12 columns within a row. So they're all within a row, and using the 12 columns eventually it's the step that I just chose, because I need some block level elements. Labels really aren't going to help me here. So when I get into those block level elements and divs, it does look a lot better. And as you can see, I've got the date selector divided up in column 4s from Bootstrap's grid. And so basically that means that there's 3 across. And we're going to have to kind of make sure that that fits perfectly. And then they stack in mobile, so they'll all be on top of each other in a mobile. So as you can see, I'm just going to slowly ease these labels out and kind of play around with some ideas of what I want. With -100, obviously, that's an option if I want to make a block level element. And it doesn't really work because you're missing the padding, as you can see. But also you can see how it says select startup month or start step month. That's an example of me bringing down my menu value. Menu end step and menu start step right now, it's kind of like, as you can see, it's something that I'm going down and it's showing on the name. So getting a little cleanup here. Yeah, we'll just watch me mess around with the CSS. CSS takes some time. It's kind of trial and error as to what looks nice. As you can see, when you're using these grids, there's a lot of padding involved. So if something's not wrapped in the grid, like, in a column, it'll stand out big time. And so everything needs to kind of have a home within the grid system. It can't have it just floating around. So there'd be, if you don't know, it'd be like a container fluid would wrap around a row, and then the row will wrap around your columns. The columns go up to 12. And the research on the Bootstrap will help you, define it more, because you're going to need to know the 12-step or the 12-grid system so you can work responsively for phones. So if you don't know it, that's a big part of front-end development. Okay, so still working on trying to make this look nice, but within the ticket builder, I need to put a due date. And we also, remember, we're going to be building the timeline. So I need to install Apex Charts and React Apex Charts so we can use it here. And it's going to go ahead and put it through our package JSON. So now that's installed and will come in handy. So let's go ahead and create that timeline module. And just create a new file and components. And let's start off with our basics of importing React. And we'll use effect and use state are going to be something we're going to be utilizing because we're building this in hooks. A lot of my other, actually all of my other projects, when we used the Apex Charts, we were using classes. And I'm switching it up this time. So it's going to be just a lot easier. It's not as much binding and whatnot. Okay, so now the timeline is going to be needed to be seen on active module. So everybody knows that once it's active module, it equals timeline, we will show the actual module here. Just like the workflow and the messages and so on and so forth. They're all based on what's active. So let's go to the nav here and create our button for timeline and switch that out. And so once that's clicked, that means the active module is timeline. Our timeline panel shows up. Voila. Okay, keep in mind right now we don't really have anything on timeline, so it's not going to do much. But it's up there in the menu. And we need to clear out that set feed. That needs to be there so we can reset every time we got to a new page. So due dates, let's go ahead and let you know that our due dates used to be a value. We used to have a due date that we were kind of adding on when we built the ticket. I'm no longer going to do that because I need that due date to kind of jump around on all the tables, and it's not going to do that from sitting here. The due date is ultimately going to be added to the time or the ID. So we had the ticket when it was made, and then we have the due date. So everywhere we go within the title/ticketId, we're passing along not only the name, who made it, but the date it was created and the date it was due. Now within doing this, you're going to see a lot of me moving around, a lot of substrings. You can see I'm altering the ticket ID to where it's going to have the ability to implement our due date. The due date that we did have, being that it is the title or the ID, it's like the selection unique item that selects and identifies this. We're going to still need to keep the original, so when we update this, we can still identify it, saying, hey, remember this thing? Now we're going to update it. So as you can see, I'm taking due date out, and I'm going to add it not only to the add ticket, but we're putting it into the update as well. So like I said, here it comes. We got a timestamp, then due date, then user email, and then whatever the title is of the actual ticket. That's the identifying value. So bear with me as I go through and take out due date and replace it with original title, which would be the active ticket currently. This will all come into full circle when we get to the server side, because I still have to identify the ticket ID to replace it. So as you can see, the ticket ID up here will be a long conglomerate of multiple items. Yeah, so as I'm coming in to do a ticket edit, these are all the things I need to do to get that due date in there. And it's a lot of substrings and whatnot and values that are just kind of combining itself to make this identifiable item. And as this is going to be shared throughout the messages table, the tickets table, and the workflow table. And it really does come in handy when you land on that timeline and it immediately has the start and end date, because that's the first thing on the timeline that needs to be gathered. And so you don't even go to get to any database yet, and you already know the first bar. So here is where we get into updating the due date. As you can see here, I'm going to have to, when I send in an object, I need to basically say, hey, you remember that ticket that I'm going to send you? It's going to say, yeah, I need you to have it, the new update for that ticket ID. That's great, but which ticket are you talking about? Well, the original one. So it says where ticket equals and then put the original. There's some more padding. This gets to be a pretty big SQL query at the end. So I'm not done with that one yet. So let's go ahead and build out the rest of the timeline using React hooks. And we're going to import Apex charts. And there's just a couple things I need to write in for it. Now our ticket list, that is the select menu. Axios is where we're going to make our call to the workflow table. Okay, loaded is going to be basically, we're going to run that once, and once only. Anything within that load it's going to grab our data, but just do it one time. You're familiar with this if you've seen other pages. So set performing update is an interesting item. I have to kind of put everything on pause when I'm giving my timeline new data, or it won't refresh. So I have to basically, using React, kind of delete that element and then bring it back, and then it will show me the new data. So I'm going to paste in these. This is the original object that has all the options and the information that the Apex chart needs. It's things like the font and the color schemes, how high that everything is as far as, a little bit about all the details. So it takes forever to type all this in, and it's just basically a huge object of different properties. And as you can see, I'm just kind of coming through showing you that these are the tooltips that has the date formats, which we'll probably have to work on in the next video. But it's a rather large object that has to send over to our Apex chart. Okay, so now that we have that, we need to get a little involved on the populateFields function. And as you remember, the populateFields is in all the modules. It's going to be something that is going to be affected when the menu of all the tickets has been changed. And in this case, on this timeline module, we're going to go ahead and write what exactly happens when that menu gets changed. Basically, we're going to find that ticket and then get all the workflow information, and then we're going to create a timeline with everything represented all the tasks represented on the timeline. So this is going to set it up for success. If it's just resetting, we go to default. If it's not, we set an active ticket. We save that active ticket, just like the other functions when we do populateFields and the other modules. We want to grab all of our messages. So then we're also going to get the details about our due dates. Now keep in mind the due date is in the value of the ticket list. Which ticket is got not only the start date but the due date. Pretty handy. So I don't even have to make an API call yet to get the first bar of start and stop for the whole project. Now, if I would have told some of my bosses in the past to do that, they would have told me no. But since this is my project and I need to share that data on every page, it's better than kind of making complicated queries. And depending on that, I can cut corners doing this. And here I'm going to go ahead and have, every time it comes out with a different bar, I want to have it select a different color. So I have an array of colors up in our object, and I'm telling it how long is this list of colors, and then I say, pick a random number between 0 or 1 in that list length, and then give me that random number's color code. And so therefore you can see that temp color equals whatever color we want. Here I'm going to put together the object that we're going to be pushing into the timeline. X is the title of whatever the timeline's showing on that line. Y is going to have 2 points of time. One is start and one is end. The get time, as you can see at the end, is where you actually break it down to a number with milliseconds. So that's where you can start if you need to get a timeline that has time on it as opposed to just the dates. The get time function is where you do that. And as you can see, my temp color is going to be dynamically picked for the fill color value. Now I'm just going to be updating my temp data. I have not set the current data yet. But remember, in all this time, you can't see the timeline because I have told it that I'm updating the timeline. So this short couple of seconds while all this is kind of functioning and getting prepared, there will be no timeline. There'll just be a loader. And now it says set up performance, and then says setting up performance is now false, meaning, okay, after a second, which is 1,000 milliseconds, we can go ahead and now we're going to show our once it's true, it'll show our timeline down there. And it does work out. There's places all over Stack Overflow. It's like, how come my timeline's not updating? And it wasn't. And even though you get the data, it won't update. So that you can take out that element of HTML and then write it again with JavaScript, and then it will have the new data. So there you go. Just force it to rewrite the chart when you give it a new ticket. So the ticket list, that is our selection menu. And down here, I'm going to have our timeline. Data chart is going to be an identifiable item that I can use in the CSS. As you can see, I'll have like a white background in case people can't read the text. It gets kind of hard to read with a dark background. Okay, so now I'm saying, hey, if this current data is an object, if that data is an object and we can kind of go through it, we can iterate through it, it's not null. And then not only that, performing update is false. So that's where we want to see our chart. And so I write a React Apex chart and give it its options, which is the current data options. And then the series is like the time, the start and stop list. And then, of course, the range bar is basically the timeline. That's what they call a timeline chart. And so the current data timeline height, as you can see, that's kind of something I made up. However high I wanted to have my chart, you can do whatever you want. If you want to make it higher or smaller or bigger, go ahead. I just made some kind of a formula that basically, depending on how many charts lines I had, it would have a certain size. Okay, so we've got a little bit of an index function. Looks like it's last index of. Let's go see if we can fix it. It needs a capital I. I can see that right away. So me kind of looking this over, yep. All right, as you can see, that's the weighting of the table, and it has the spinning of the wheel until the loader just does that until the actual data is ready to go. we want to do if it's active module timeline, I need to have this container fluid. So I'm going to go up and alter the class within that div to say container fluid if this is timeline. Container fluid makes it so that the page goes from side to side at 100%. As you can see, it works a lot better for a timeline. And then let's go ahead and give it a little bit of padding like the other container. And like I said, that chart needs to have a nice background that we can read legibly. So data chart for now, all of them are going to have, if I use this data chart, I can have the background as white. And that is working. And remember, that data is coming off of the ticket. It's coming off the ticket, the ID. So we haven't made any API calls yet. We've just loaded the ticket. Now, let's go to the workflow. And as you can see, here's all the information that you have your due date. So let's update over here. I haven't really been able to, we haven't written anything that updates. When you update the title, we don't have anything that updates all the titles and all the tables, which is a big problem. As you can see, no one was going to be able to do this but the person with the database. So what we're going to end up doing, and here's, as you can see, the timeline's not working. It only has that one piece. So we're going to have to start finding a way to get more data in there. And in the end, we'll have a SQL query that fixes the multiple tables. But for the time being, let's go ahead and get the start and stop module into our object of the module. What we're going to do is basically have, just like we have the step title and the step price, we're going to also have a start date and an end date. And then obviously we'll have, within that object, there'll be another array that's nested, and that will have our tasks. But we need to have these items added to our object so that we can load up the timeline. And here I am building out the temporary data, getting it prepared to either, these will be happening when we do posts, and if we do puts, obviously a get and a delete now, not a big deal. But you'll see me sliding in these values and getting the values of the menus prepared for the Axios basically post. I'm very familiar. You're getting very familiar with this list of values from these menus. As you can see, they're getting utilized quite a bit, and since they independently have different names that I'm giving them to the date selector, it really does come in handy. You only have to write the selection menu for dates once, and you can use it as many times as you want, and as many times on one page as you want. So think about that as being helpful. So here we go. Here's when I'm adding it together, I need to put in these step start and the step end values so that they'll be included into our object. And we're going to do this yeah. So I also need to do an identifiable. I come in after they've made a selection, and I basically clear all these back to the first selection on their menu. So whenever you make an update, I need these to be cleared out. And what I'm going to do is do a for each to go through each one of those date selection menus. And I needed to make them identifiable. So they all share this data selector date. And that way, when I am done with my update and I've done my put, I can set all of those menus back to 0. And that's what I've done here. And that validate is just going to be used again. So let's go down to where we post, create step, and let's validate. And I have to expand it to have those select menus here as well. Post step is going to take some alterations as well. As you can see, we have already done the put for the step start and the step end. So we're going to have to take those and get them over to the post. And let's just kind of take that and use it as model as we write. And it's a lot easier to copy and paste if you know it works. If you know that it's written correctly. There we go. So we'll declare those. And we'll update our object. So it'll be prepared to go. Okay, let's clean that up a little bit. And it's that's not necessary. So here's our payload. As you can see, we have step price, and it's not in there yet. So we're not doing any. Let's go ahead and get this data working. We're going to make a call to get basically a very similar call that we made over on the workflow page. We need to get a similar API call together. So what I've done here is I've got the get workflow kind of call, but I need to kind of prep it for the timeline. And if you look at the way that this data is set up, like it sends you, luckily MySQL is going to send you an object, and that's great. But anything that's within that object that's nested has not been parsed. It's still a string. And the thing is, that refers to our task array. You know, the task array within our workflow table, that's something that's going to come in, and we're going to have to parse that because it's nested and it's a string, and we need to get that back out to an array when we receive it from the get. So here you can see me grabbing quite a bit of stuff, but not everything I need. I've got to have to iterate through stuff that currently, when I get it, is a string. And so you're going to see me kind of toy around with my data. And I need to kind of build it out into a new object and then save it. And you're going to see me go ahead and toy around with these. I need to get everything prepared so I can build it this exact same way that I did my first piece of the my first iteration of the timeline object that we built from the edit or the title, which is, it's ingenious in my opinion because I got that. I didn't have to use a table to get it. But now that I have that, I can identify which ticket I want. And then here we go with the same process with adding the tickets data into the same process of building the object for the timeline. So as you can see, I'm going down and copying how did I build that object. So it's selected timeline, and then I've got a title, and then I've got Y as an array with, you know, start and end. And by looking at the workflow, I'm going to basically contemplate how to do that many times over based on how many steps we have. And so we got to make sure we got the data correct. So it's going to come in as basically I'm going to be going through the data. This is incorrect, I think, first, because I don't think that's the full one. It would be if it was just the first one. Yeah. So here we go. Let's parse through that nested object that we received. There it is. We only have one thing. And it's got an error for the rest of the stuff. And let's get that Do you see how that's still a string, the steps data? We got to fix that. Yeah, so when we get this we got like one iteration from the database, and it's an object, but the steps data array is still a string. So that's not going to help us when we're building a timeline because it doesn't know how to read a string. It needs to have the values of, the X and Y. So what it is I'm going to basically do the first iteration of steps data, which is all we got, and then the steps title. As you can see, I'm getting closer. There we go. The word's a bit of a mess. But yeah, I basically had to go through and parse it, and then I could walk through each piece and get out what I needed. So it's a little cleaner now. But as you can see, like, I'm going to mess around with the font sizes, and I'm also going to toy around with the months because it's still kind of a wreck. Like, right now, I'm toying with, now I don't even see the dates at the bottom. So this object that I pasted in at the beginning that has all the timeline options, those I would imagine, based on your project or your typical projects, you're going to want to do some modifications in case you want time or no time, or in case you think that there's not enough space. You might want to change out what your format of your dates are, like I just did. So here we go. As you can see, when I run these tickets, let's do a user walkthrough, and let's see where I stand with this thing. I'm gonna build a ticket. Walk through this whole thing. Year-long project is the name of my ticket. I'm gonna write out, I got a due date, just write a little bit of information, and this should be no problem. Ticket was added. Okay, great. And let's make a message that adds to the ticket so that we know the messages are working with my new ticket. There you are. Let's do a reply to my message in my new ticket. Good. Okay, well, now we're on the workflow module, and I've selected my new ticket. I'm going to add a start and end date, and then I'm going to start adding tasks. And so within my first step, I'm gonna add a couple tasks so we know how this works from the last few lessons. I'm just putting this as waiting, just something so we have. All right, so now we've got one step. And there's my step. So yes, that works. Now keep in mind, anybody who knows a lot about databases, what happens if you change the due date, or if you change the title of something? The problem is it'll change in one table, not the other. So I'm about to come full head to head with that problem when I say I'd like to change out something in my title. So everything seems to be working. I've got it going well. However, let's go see if I can change the title, and that's going to be a massive problem. I'm just going to clean up a little bit here. As you can see, this is the correct iteration through. We have one iteration for res data only given to us, and once we've parsed out steps data, we have any number of steps data. So that was what I came up with to tally through my new parsed steps data for my timeline. Yep, there we go. Now we got 3 of them working good. Now let's say I want to change the date, like I said. I'm going to change the date on my ticket. That should be okay. It should be normal. You should be able to change the due date. Guess what? How? How on earth can you change all of them? If anybody knows more about SQL, it's possible. You can update all your tables with one SQL query. So right here is not the way to do it. We're going to take due date out, obviously, because we ain't using it anymore. We're looking for the original title to do the replacement. So that works. So this took me a little bit to kind of think about like what the best option was. Because you can do it in the front end too. You could say, hey, did that update the title? Yes. Okay. And then fire off another Axios put and change another title in another table. And when that worked, then you can do it again until you fired off however many times you need to change the title. Or you do it once. And that's the way you need to do it. I don't know why there may be a reason why you want to call multiple times. But if you can do it with one SQL update, that's the way. So I'm just cleaning up a little bit of making sure that these things are doing what I'm asking. These things need to only render when it actually has the actual list available. There you go. I haven't got to spell everything correctly. Yep, that's what happens when it's spelled correctly. So let's redo that and try to update. It looks like our updates were working. But only one thing's coming up. So how do we do this? How do we update the tables so that if I update something in the tickets, then the module will be updated and it will have all the data correct? Here it is. You're going to do an update of the workflow manager's tickets. You got to do a left join of the messages table, and then you have to equal that out. You got to do the same thing to the workflow table, and then you change them. You might want to pause it when you look at that SQL. And so from there on out, now they are, if you update a table, if you update a title or a ticket due date, then you update all the tables with the same ticket ID so that they're on the same page. And when you go to the different modules, they're up to date with what the new title is and the new due date. Let's go ahead and do a test for our project. Got a new step coming up, and let's go ahead and, let's just give it a name, give it a number, and give it some dates. And let's go take a look. Let's give it some tasks. Nothing serious, just something for an example. Okay. Now let's go to our timeline. And there it is. It's working. So every step's going to be showing up, and we can put that against our full timeline. Yeah, good stuff. We'll also be putting together in the next classes and next tutorials, I'll put together like an invoice builder, and then that along with that will come like a budgeting app, a budgeting module. So your invoices can be tallied up in, some graphs. So visually you can kind of see where you stand. And that'll come along with this tutorial in the future. So stay tuned. And we'll be refining what we have here, hunting down bugs, and then obviously moving on with the next modules. And I'm assuming that if there's new concepts that I'm finding in competing software, I might add them up as well. And if anybody has any ideas that they'd like to see, let me know. Thanks a lot.